he did not expose himself to Paula Jones in a hotel room in Arkansas. In Little Rock, he claimed he'd never met her. She made the whole thing up. Then he was forced under oath to admit that he had, in fact, done it, and he paid Paula Jones $850,000 in the settlement.
Yeah.
So almost $1 million for something he claimed he didn't even do. Both Clintons, as you pointed out in the opening, are habitual liars. In her case, it doesn't matter whether it is being under sniper fire in Bosnia or her email server or whether or not she really had classified
Never
documents.
seen anything like it, except for Barack Obama. This woman lies constantly.
Yeah, she's incapable of sounding sincere. I mean, she could be reading the breakfast menu, and she out loud, and you would still believe she was lying because she always sounds like she's lying. You know, she was named after Sir Edmund Hillary. That turns out to be a lie. She came out of the White House dead broke. That was a lie. Her grandparents were immigrants to this country. That was a lie. She's incapable of telling the truth.
Wow. Well, Ed Klein's book, the title is perfect. Unlikable. She really is an unlikable human being.
That's a terrific book, and Ed Klein is a terrific reporter and a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And he's not a right-winger. He's not a conservative. He's got no agenda other than journalism.
Yeah. No, he's a journalist. He's a professional journalist.
And his sources are extraordinary. And, of course, the only good news here is probably the only person on the planet who dislikes Hillary more than I do would be Barack Hussein Obama.
That was my next area to get into. We have to take a break here, but I'm going to go right through it. They, let's see, had an encounter. You can confirm this. I know you'll know it. A couple of months ago, she went into the Oval Office, apparently just basically cleared and walked in. I'm not sure if Bill was in tow behind her or not. She walked in, and Obama was in there. So was Valerie Jarrett. And she started saying, listen, you gotta get this crap off my back. Stop with putting me down. Stop with causing me trouble. And he acted like he didn't know what she was talking about. And she said, Barack, get your effing dogs off me now. And she screamed it, or nearly screamed it, and it was heard down the halls. They hate each other. Correct.
Well, there's a lot of hangover from when they ran against each other. Sidney Blumenthal, of course, got caught. He was the guy who spread the rumors far and wide that Barack Obama was a homosexual. He also spread the rumors that he was the son of Frank Marshall Davis.
Oh, how do you feel about those two statements?
You know what? I have no idea, but I do know this. Sidney got nailed, and that is why Rahm Emanuel had to lay down the edict to Hillary. She could hire anyone she wanted at state, anyone, with one exception. There was one guy who could never be on the Obama administration payroll, and that was Sidney Blumenthal.
I think Sidney is, by the way, just for your edification, I think he's correct. That documentary, Dreams of My Real Father, which came out to help Romney, was, to me, the truth about Barack Hussein Obama. And I think it was contributed to, the book, by some intelligence agency of a little nation from the Middle East, a geographically little nation anyway. I think some of the information there about Davis and what really happened was extraordinary. I think that is essentially the truth of Barack Hussein Obama, that Frank Davis was the father. He raped the mother, or certainly had illicit sex with her, and she gave birth to him potentially in Seattle and then went right back to Hawaii. So not sure, but it's very compelling. Dreams of My Real Father. You can find it on the internet now.
I'll have to check that out. In the meantime, I think it is very clear now that Sidney Blumenthal is the guy who comes up with this whole canard, this bogus idea that the attack on the U.S. mission in Benghazi was caused by some anti-Islamic video, which showed one time on the internet in Turkey.
That was his deal? He put that fake story together?
There's among the memos that have now been captured is Sidney claiming that this is what she should say. Because remember, this happens just weeks before a presidential election. So neither Clinton nor Obama are interested in confirming that American interests have been hit abroad and 4 Americans are dead by a group affiliated with Al-Qaeda. So they needed to come up with some cover story, and Sidney supplied the cover story. Now, we also know that at a certain point, Hillary was told at the highest levels of her intelligence services that this was not true. she continues to tell the lie over and over again, going so far as going to the memorial service for the 4 killed Americans and looking their parents in the eye and repeating it yet again.
Wow. That's about as cold as it gets. She's got a heart of a stone, something.
Well, it's funny you should say that because, as you know, I worked for a number of years for former President Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
And to his surprise, he was invited to the Clinton White House to meet the president and confer with him after Nixon had made a trip to China in his post-presidential years.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, he had occasion to meet Mrs. Clinton in the hallway.
Right.
And I said, well, Mr. President, what'd you think of her? And he just looked at me and he said, she's cold as ice.
Someone else I know met her once and said that she has eyes that are... what did you say? They were dead or the eyes of a killer or both, something like that. He was in the presence of pure evil, which sort of goes along with what you're saying. You mentioned Richard Nixon. Did Richard Nixon have a good side? The press would have us think otherwise. I disagree.
No, I think that, there's this new biography out by, strangely enough, by Evan Thomas is the most balanced one. I've written a book on Nixon and Watergate, which I think is a more balanced view. I mean, he was both very great and very flawed. Mm-hmm. He was an enigma. I mean, he was super confident and he was paranoid. He was brilliant and he was timid. He did some great things. He made some giant mistakes. Taking us off the gold standard would come to mind.
Yeah.
Yet he left a more peaceful world than he came into, and he set himself up in Watergate through a series of mistakes. But of the presidents I worked for, and I worked for 3, he's the one that I retain the greatest affection for. He was the one who remembered my birthday. He was the one who knew the name of my wife and kids, and
I see that's a class act right there.
Yeah, whereas I worked for Reagan, and while Reagan was very great in a completely different way, he was very detached from you. Mm-hmm. If one day you worked for him for 10 years, one day you didn't show up, he would never say, "Hey, where's Roger?" Whoever the new man was who replaced you would come in without missing a beat.
Yeah.
Whereas Nixon would call every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. at exactly 10 a.m. looking for the latest political gossip in his post-presidential years.
Very interesting. Reagan was a media master, obviously, because of his background, but I once interviewed him and asked him we need 2 minutes, and he said, okay. And he did 1:59 with no stopwatch. He just did it. He knew.
Yeah, I had the same exact experience. I once asked him in an airplane hangar to film a 30-second spot for Tom Kaine, who was running for governor in New Jersey. It was totally impromptu. I had to do it this way to get around the White House staff that was trying to stop me from getting such a spot. So we had a camera crew standing by. Our candidate there, who became governor by 1,200 votes out of 2 million cast in 1981, said, Mr. President, would you do a quick TV commercial for us? And he looked at, and we handed him a script. He looked at it and he said, okay, how long? We said 28 and a half. And he did it in one take, 28 and a half on the button.
I'm not surprised. Having seen that and experienced it, I hear you. That's and he was that way.
Extraordinary.
He did give some remarkable speeches, Reagan. You can't take that away from him. He had a communication skill with a lot of America that worked. Okay, back to Hillary and Obama. Where are they going to end up? There is talk that the Obamas are going to move. It's okay. The Obamas are going to move to Asheville, North Carolina. They've purchased property. Escrow has closed to set up residency. Somebody is retired. One senator is retiring from there, and Michelle is allegedly going to run. And there's a largely black area there for the Senate, and she'll continue the Obama dynasty. And who knows what she'll do after that. Any truth to that?
Well, if she has to choose a state to run in, that's not the one I'd choose because that's not a slam dunk, to say the least.
Okay.
Competitive, but a state that's trending right and trending Republican, that's one. Secondarily, I still don't believe Joe Biden is out of this race.
Thank you. I don't either.
I think what will transpire here is I think there's a high probability that there will be charges brought against Hillary by the Justice Department. And at that juncture, for the good of the party, and with the president begging him to, the vice president will just have to step in. Now, he doesn't earn the enmity of all those feminists by challenging Hillary now. Yet the Obamas are able to get rid of the Clintons once and for all. I think that's the way this is going to go down. Now, obviously, it's just conjecture on my part. I'm not an intimate.
Well, supposedly
the FBI.
The FBI boss is a no-nonsense guy, and if he goes to DOJ with facts and figures and data, I don't know. Can they indict her? Does she have too much power? That's an interesting thing to conceive of.
I don't think she has the power over the Obama Justice Department. I think he's going to make this call. If Ed Klein is right in reporting that meeting, which I believe he is 100%.
The one I related?
The die may be cast, where she ultimately pays an enormous price. Look, she's humiliated his administration. They laid down very strict rules for how the Clinton Foundation was to be handled at the State Department to avoid exactly the conflict of interest that they've gotten.
Oh, they know no restraint? None.
Yeah, almost makes Obama look terrible. But he tried to restrain her, and he failed. Then you compound the thing by the misuse of classified documents. General Petraeus had his career ruined because he made documents available to his mistress. And she's not going to be prosecuted for the misuse of these documents, which now that they've been on an unsecure server, are most likely in the hands of the Chinese and the Russians.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. By the way, in case you folks missed it, the Department of Navy has now today announced that they are going to put together a recurring presence in the South China Sea, in the 12-mile exclusion zone around these new artificial islands that the Chinese have brilliantly built. They're very, very shrewd, and try to, I believe, incite some kind of a military response from Beijing, which could lead to a war.
Yep, extraordinary.
I mean, these are sacrificed crewmen and ships that they're potentially going to be sending in there. They're bait, and much the same thing can be said about some of the Middle East dynamics. This is not a good situation for anybody. We have a lot of very negative potential. If Hillary is not indicted, let's take this track. She will, in all likelihood, be nominated to run if she is not indicted. Then that puts us up against whom? Who in the GOP? Can Donald make it? America loves him. The part of America that still thinks about America and still understands.
It's totally up to him. I mean, in all honesty, it's time for him to dip into his wallet. He has spent almost nothing running so far. It's been a brilliant strategy. Has surged ahead in the polls based solely on free media coverage. And his lead in the summertime was not a slim lead or a 5-point lead. In some places, he was leading by as much as 20 points.
Yeah.
And he has put forward a very dynamic tax reform and job creation plan, which, frankly, is the best one out there.
That is the best tax reform plan I have ever heard.
Well, you got a couple good things here. The biggest one is if the current corporate tax rate in the United States is 35 and China is 25, by cutting ours to 15, you would spark a boom like you have never seen. All those companies doing business in China would come home because it's now cheaper and more efficient to do business here and more profitable.
He has the potential, if he runs and wins, to become one of the great presidents in our history. He's also proposing to do away with the income tax for the entire low-wage earner bracket of Americans, which would put a lot of money into the system. I mean, he's smart. These are smart plans. I don't know if he thought them.
$2 trillion offshore that's being held offshore isn't being taxed in this country by corporations who are trying to shield it. He'd bring that money back. And
That's
of course,
huge.
the other real question, which I think everybody misses, I worked in the Senate, I worked in the House, I worked as a lobbyist, as well as working for 3 presidents. There's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of waste in the federal government, in the federal budget. But what people don't understand is that every dollar in there was put in there by someone, some special interest, some senator or some congressman working at the behest of the widget manufacturers, whoever it may be. And the reason it never really gets cut is because you never have a leader with the financial independence to come in and cut it. Trump would slash federal spending, and when the lobbyists called to grumble, he would hang up on them because he doesn't owe them anything. You can't buy Trump.
This is really an unprecedented thing in American presidential politics. A man who is not owned and controlled. The book is The Clintons' War on Women. The Clintons, plural, War on Women. And it is a horrific expose of page after page of criminality. I don't know any other words for it. These people are arch criminals in this country. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. They are career criminals, and they're also, they're hypocrites, extraordinary hypocrites. So Hillary puts out a video roughly 2 weeks ago aimed at college girls who have been sexually assaulted, and she says, "You deserve to be believed."
Oh, please. Yeah.
Well, what about Juanita Broderick? What about Kathy Willey? What about Paula Jones? What about Liz Ward Grayson? What about Emily Wellstone? What about Becky Brown, Helen Dowdy, Dorothy Kyle Browning, Christy Zurcher? This list goes on and on and on. All of those women Hillary calls sluts, nuts, bimbos, whores, bitches. And she discredits them. She smears them. Why don't they deserve to be believed? 3 weeks ago, she puts out a gun control proposal. The gun control proposal says if you've ever been accused of domestic abuse, you shouldn't be allowed to own a gun. Well, that means Hillary wouldn't be allowed to own a gun because, as numerous Secret Service agents told me for this book, she has kicked, punched, slapped, scratched, and thrown hard objects at her husband. Ashtrays, lamps, car keys, briefing books.
Yeah.
She is epically short-tempered. She's got a foul mouth.
Well, the abuse that she's dished out to the Secret Service people around her and other law enforcement people who have been assigned to give her security is legendary.
Yes, indeed.
She's a real piece of work.
No question about it.
How much more depraved and demented can someone get? Now, she hasn't lost it. She's still shrewd. She's still smart. But age, and I think she knew when she was ousted from her bid by Obama. I'm not sure what kind of a meeting they had. Do you have any idea when they decided to have her kind of agreed and not be elected or stop the war against him so he could be elected? What was there some? Obviously, they promised her state and maybe something else. I don't know.
Well, I actually think that the offer of state came later. It was a brilliant stroke on Obama's part because he knew the Clintons hated him. And he knew he would be subject to their criticism and their undermining.
He's thinking about his reelection then.
Well, as you know, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Pulling her into the cabinet was brilliant because it meant Bill couldn't carp and shoot at him from the outside. And then, yes, they help him get reelected because they have a joint interest in covering up Benghazi. It looks terrible for both of them.
Yeah.
And Hillary's already begun to think about succeeding Obama. And then, of course, you have the Clinton Foundation scandal, which, to their credit, the New York Times reports on page one day after day. For example, the fact that control of all U.S., 75% of U.S. uranium production was passed to the Russians after very healthy contributions to the foundation from a large number of Russian hoodlums. Hillary signs off on this, what can only be called a treasonous decision. And Obama continues to be embarrassed by the antics of the Clintons, by the open stealing and bribery of both Bill and Hillary. And I doubt that he forgets or has forgotten. It was only a couple of years ago when Bill Clinton said to Ted Kennedy, a few years ago, this guy Obama would be fetching our coffee and carrying our bags.